Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry at the movies, the host Jerry Saravia. So I wanted to abandon my usual little intro that I started doing a couple of weeks ago to jump right in and discuss Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now, I had discussed this movie back when it was released in the summer of 2008, May of 2008, May 22nd, for indie fans out there, and I discussed it, and I had an old account, and talked about it in length about the pros and cons of the fourth Indiana Jones film. And what really surprised me was the reaction by a lot of people who told me that I was nuts. Not that I was nuts for disliking it, I was nuts for liking it. I thought it was a great movie, and I still do. Although I admit that as a critic there are flaws, but then there have been flaws consistent with the other Indiana Jones pictures. Now, before any of you start telling me the old stuff that I've heard over and over again, for example, Shia LaBeouf being cast in the movie in the first place, Shia LaBeouf swinging around in vines, aliens, let's see, not enough action, too little action, extreme action, absurd action, he doesn't fire his weapon. You know, I've heard these comments time and time again. Surviving a nuclear blast in a fridge. Uh, I just wanted to get down to the very essentials of this movie. Now, there are a whole bunch, so I'm just going to mention some. First of all, what the fans seem to forget, aside from what they deem as screenwriting problems and this and that and the other, and the implausibility of the whole damn thing in the first place, aside from all that, when people start mentioning the fact that he doesn't fire his gun, I have to tell you that, for me anyway, Indiana Jones, yes, he has fired his gun several times in the first three films, but he's not a bloodthirsty hero. He's not Rambo. And he uses a gun when necessary. So yes, in Crystal Skull, he pulls out his gun, but he doesn't fire it. He threatens one of the natives with a gun. In Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, he kills a couple of people with a gun right at the beginning and loses his gun. So he doesn't have a gun for basically 3/4 of Temple of Doom. Raiders, he uses it. Last Crusade, he kills 3 Nazis with 1 bullet. But this is set sometime after the Last Crusade, and that's what people tend to forget. Now, there's been a gap between 1989, certainly, and 2008. That's almost 20 years. So I would be forgiving for those who maybe do not remember some of the specifics of the Last Crusade. In particular, Indiana Jones in that movie became a changed man by the end of that picture, because the prize was the gold, right? This is what he always sought, was the gold. At the beginning of the film, he gets the Cross of Coronado, which is what he was pursuing as a kid, as played by River Phoenix in the teaser opening. And that's true. He, gets that Cross of Coronado. Then later on, he finds it in 1938, which starts off the movie where Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones, and places it in a museum. Then he looks for the Holy Grail, which of course is not made of gold, and almost loses the cup, is ready to retrieve it, and his father, Henry Jones Sr., played by Sean Connery, helps him to make a decision that is, leave the Holy Grail alone, let's get out of here. Because the Holy Grail in that movie was really his father. It was the relationship with his father, repairing that relationship. It's a father-son movie. And even Indy himself says at one point in the film, I didn't come for the cup of Christ, I came to find my father. Now, when you base that, you can see, I believe, the difficulty that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas had in crafting a story that made sense following the events of Last Crusade, because when they hired the writer, Jeffrey Bohm, who unfortunately did pass away, who wrote Last Crusade and also wrote Lethal Weapon 2 and 3, they hired him because Jeffrey Boehm has been quoted as saying that he wanted to develop the character, to bring out some of the characteristics of the character, a little bit of his background, and so on and so forth, which was, let's be honest, missing in the Temple of Doom, although we saw a different side of Indy in that picture, and was only barely there really in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Really, that was more of a movie establishing the character rather than developing the character. Now, based on that, how can we be then so surprised to see that in Crystal Skull, Indiana Jones is not interested in finding the gold? He's not really interested in finding artifacts. I mean, he is, but not with the intent of greed. He is a more responsible archaeologist. Now, that doesn't mean that the character suffers because of that. It makes him more interesting. Um, and, you know, he still uses his fists, and when he goes out globetrotting, as he always had, he still carries his whip and his gun, interestingly enough. But he likes to be called Henry. Um, and nobody really refers to him as Indiana. And his father has passed away, and Marcus Brody, the curator, passed away, so really he's almost all alone. And really the film ultimately is about establishing that the character is a little more wise than he used to be. He's seen the evil that men do when they're corrupted by wanting the gold for themselves. Now, in Crystal Skull, it's the Crystal Skull is really what the object is. This is not something that's made of gold. In fact, it's really an alien's head. But that's what I think people tend to forget, is that the character has gone through some changes. He served in World War II and witnessed some things at Roswell, of all places. So it never really, it didn't bother me that they chose to not neuter the character, but develop the character. But he still, you know, he still fights, and he still has his wits intact. And you know, it is good old Indiana Jones, just a little older. And he repairs his relationship with Marion Ravenwood, played again by Karen Allen. Discovers he has a son played by Shia LaBeouf. I mean, were any of you really surprised that any of this was going to start, that it was going to develop in this way? You know? Now, the fact is, too, that because the expectations were so high, I think any type of movie, even if he had pursued the gold, some sort of golden artifact or Christian golden artifact, as if Indiana Jones only pursues Christian artifacts, and that's not the case. In fact, that's what Crystal Skull shares with Temple of Doom, is that they're more cartoonish than the other entries in the movie, in the series rather, and also they pursue objects that are not Christian relics. Temple of Doom, it was the Shankara stones, which, by the way, he doesn't keep for himself, does he? He returns one of the stones, the others being lost, to the village to restore life to the village. So he walks away with nothing. Raiders of the Lost Ark, he retrieves the Ark of the Covenant, brings it back, but the government takes it away and puts it in Area 51, which establishes the opening of Crystal Skulls, the fact that the Ark is there, which he doesn't know it's there. At least I guess we can assume he doesn't know. And Last Crusade, well, he doesn't get the Holy Grail. He gets the Cross of Coronado in the opening teaser, second half of the opening teaser, but that's it. Now, this is called character development. Now, I know people have had issues with that. They don't want to see their Indiana Jones not being engaged in the type of stuff that we enjoyed seeing him do, which was to fire his pistol, as if that's all he really ever did, which it is not. And he does get to use his whip. Now, screenwriting problems, yes. I mean, there are some, but it has more to do with logic, I think, than the characters. I think the characters were well written. I had no issues with the characters, except for John Hurt. John Hurt as the older archaeologist who they find off of the Amazon in Peru, because he helped to hide the Crystal Skull, is a character I didn't really quite care for. That's a character that, like Abner Ravenwood, would have been more preferable to have heard of him than actually see him. But It was almost like there they were trying to match up with someone of Sean Connery's stature. John Hurt is a wonderful actor, but it seemed like it was kind of the wrong character for him to play. Um, but nevertheless, and Marion, yes, I would love to have had more scenes between Marion and Indy, uh, because those two, to me, always deserved to be together, and I had always hoped to see them return. And I like the Crystal Skull mythology. It's a little bit convoluted. They mention there are 13 crystal skulls, but when they arrive at that temple, the Akator, um, there only seem to be 12. And then there's that alien, which a dead alien that Kate Blanchett's character Spalko, who I think is a terrific villain, by the way, she takes it from Area 51 in the opening teaser, but then somehow gets it through customs and shows it to Indiana Jones in Peru. And I thought, well, why is she carrying it around? Now, yes, the inside of their heads is made of crystal, but I thought that was a little convoluted, a little addle-brained, that part of it, that aspect of it. But other than that, I mean, I still enjoy the idea that he brought aliens into the mix, and the fact that the the aliens had retrieved all these treasures and kept them in a throne room inside of a pyramid that eventually changes into a flying saucer. Um, it was inevitable that Indiana Jones would, I think, encounter aliens at some point, or some sort of alien intelligence. And let's not forget that even the great, well, he likes to be called fantasist, so we'll leave it at that. And, okay, that's like a whole other discussion we're not going to cover today. The fantasist, Harlan Ellison, who was a big fan of Raiders of the Lost Ark, called it something approaching sci-fi. Because if you think about it, Raiders of the Lost Ark, there are all these booby traps right from the beginning of that film. There's a sort of a, if you think about it, a little science fiction element, because of course none of us really ever encounter these type of booby traps. Collapsing wall of spikes, or a spike chamber, really anything in any of those movies. So it was inevitable that alien intelligence of some kind would find its way into this series. I mean, it doesn't always have to be supernatural aspects. It could be many different aspects. Indiana Jones has been everywhere, you know. So he's a globe-trotting archaeologist who apparently can speak Quechuan perfectly, but doesn't know a word of Spanish from what we observed in Raiders of the Lost Ark. But these are just movies. They're fun. And as long as you're entertained by them, and understand that there is some sort of a context to it all, and how they develop the character, then that's good enough for this series. I mean, this is better than National Treasure. It's better than the Mummy movie series. It's better than anything else that tries or has tried to knock off or rip off the Indiana Jones formula. Nothing else comes close. And I think this movie was in the spirit of Last Crusade, with some of the intensity of the first two pictures, but mostly the escapism is there, but it's not nearly as escapist. So there's more focus on the story than in the previous pictures, I'll grant you that much, but the story doesn't grab me the same way as the other ones, but I liked many aspects of it at the same time. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm an Indiana Jones fan, but up to a certain point, because I was never really a huge fan of the Young Indiana Jones TV series, and if you've been watching my channel, you know I've already discussed that in a previous episode. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is the ending left me a little misty-eyed. There was a little bit of everything. In fact, even Rex Reed, who didn't give the film a favorable review, said, you got everything here, from entering a cafe to being in the middle of the desert in Area 51 to being in the Peruvian jungle with monkeys to encountering all these crystal skeletons. To, I mean, it has the nature, it has the spirit of the movies. I didn't feel it was tired or anything of that nature. I thought it approached the spirit and tone of Last Crusade. Unlike what George Lucas said, which was that it was closer to Raiders than the other ones. I disagree with that. Raiders of the Lost Ark is still the greatest action-adventure film I've ever seen in my life, period. And it's the best Indiana Jones flick, not just because it's the first one. And I like the other ones just as much, but I thought Crystal Skull really went out of its way to capture the character and where he was at, and still be entertaining, despite implausibilities and everything else. And we're not going to go through all that because the other movies were just as implausible. Yes, he never quite survived anything like a nuclear attack and hiding inside a lead-lined fridge. I'll grant you that. But for the most part, I just thought this was just a fun movie. And its innocence shouldn't be dismissed. But it seems like nowadays we don't want too much innocence in our movies anymore. Everything has to be dark and very dispiriting. Oh well. I'll probably talk more about this in the future because there's still some other elements I could discuss. I don't have the time right now. So there you have it, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Discussion will continue in the future. And this is Jerry the Movies with your host, Jerry Saravia, signing off.